Hi everyone, Lathan Shoot Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Jeromes Dream album, The Gray In Between. This is the fourth full-length LP from old school screamo and post-hardcore outfit Jeromes Dream, a group that formed way back in the late 90s in my home state of Connecticut and dropped a debut 10-inch that over the years has grown to be a real cult classic for these genres. And how could it not be, with its violently chaotic riffs and drums, shrieking vocals, and mathematical grooves that are moving so fast they're beyond calculation. This record over here is really 15 minutes of pure mayhem, which was followed up a year later with the record Presents, which was a bit easier to decipher but just as zany, with these kind of hokey, shouted vocals and riffs that ran like something more akin to a straight-up noise rock album. With this thing, Jeromes Dream sounded almost like a different band entirely. The group essentially called it quits after that in the early 2000s, only to make a triumphant return in 2018 with the announcement of a new album that they successfully crowdfunded the recording and release of. The issue, though, is that the record was kind of a disappointment. The mixes were super messy, the drums overtook everything, and not only that, but the vocals were kind of awful. They had this kind of weird shouty spoken word quality to them that I don't think quite worked. But hey, weirdly, once again, Jeromes Dream was sounding like a different band entirely, with a change up in guitar tones and riff and vocal styles. And now several years later, we have the follow-up to that comeback record, and Jeromes Dream changed it up again. They're sounding like a different band, albeit a better one than what we got on their last LP. I will say though, the band is sounding harsh once again, like they did on the debut, but in a slightly different way. The performances on this thing are more fluid and groovier, not as jarring or disorienting. A lot of head-banging beats and riffs, but that mostly serves as a framework for some of the harshest and most searing guitars I've heard in years. The distortion on this album is more hideous and unforgiving than what you may hear on a lot of black metal records. The bass has a really grimy tone to it as well that links in with the guitars nicely, and the vocals are so loud, nasty, and extreme, I get a sore throat listening to them. So given all that and the very sad, dark chord progressions on these tracks, this thing is a pretty dystopian listen, which rounds out at a very blunt 25 minutes, split across 10 different tracks. Now, to enjoy this thing, I think you've really just got to be down with the onslaught and eat up the dark, noisy little nuances the band works into nearly every moment, whether that's the hits of feedback in between all the riffs on the opening track, or the bittersweet chord changes that follow that eventually lead to this really murderous breakdown. There's also the sinister chord progression and blast beat combo on South by Isolation, the skipping snare patterns that follow not too long afterward. The band on this record is not only sounding astronomically tight, but they're pulling off some really interesting angles with the guitar and drum passages on numerous tracks here. The length combined with the forlorn chord progressions of Pines on the Hill makes me feel like I'm listening to what you would get if you emo violenced a Slint song, because yes, there are some very intense and harsh synced up riff passages in the first half, but the second feels like a slow downward spiral into a deafening vortex of depression, and it has the lyrics to match. A handily has the most dissonant and crushing riffs on the entire LP. Meanwhile, some of the blast beat passages and quickly strummed guitars on Holiday with Infinity really give some of these screamo, blackened shoegaze bands kind of a run for their money. Not that those bands have been super active these days. Anyway, some of the chirpy guitar licks and bits of feedback worked into the second half of the song are a sharp move too. And the lyrics essentially tell the story of a guy who sacrifices himself in very nasty and graphic fashion for some kind of metaphorical greater good. The final moments of this record sees Jeromes Dream in a deep place of despair, with lyrics that I won't spoil, but I will say that the vocals sound way less aggressive and much more defeated than they do on the rest of the LP. The song's closing moments being led by these very somber, simple, clean, repetitively strummed guitar chords leaves things feeling very lifeless and final and cold. And in a nutshell, that's kind of the record. As far as flaws, I will say there are a couple of tracks here that feel like they don't really add all that much to the overall meta of the album, as the riffs and sonic palette of this thing does tend to run a little one note. There are a couple of interlude type cuts in the mix that do provide some very necessary breathing room, but I think the core songs of this record could have used just a bit more versatility to them. But even as it currently stands, this is still one of the most thrilling and hard-hitting screamo adjacent records I've heard in a while, and I encourage you guys and anybody who is even mildly into that style of music or anything that kind of falls under that umbrella to check this thing out. I'm feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this one. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head, it's another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Jeromes Dream of Forever.